What's up, guys? Thank you very much for being here. We are very happy to be here. To be 100% honest with you, this is the second time we recorded this episode because the first time uh, our microphones were off. So, but the battery died. So, but we're halfway through it. But all right, another chance at having some fun with these topics. Um, we are going to talk about three things that are very close to our heart, and that is having a large family. We're going to talk about homeschooling, and we're going to talk about escaping a busy life. And so, having a large family, um, I think you and I were talking about this earlier today, when we only had one, our first one. We talked. I remember telling you I think I want to have four kids. And at that time, it sounded as it was this almost like impossible thing. Like, hey, that's not gonna happen.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of kids. That's not gonna happen. And for some reason, I would say that, and I would say that without thinking about it twice. I said, man, if we ever have four kids, it would be amazing. So fast forward to today, having four kids and almost five. Two things I have to say. Number one, it's not what I thought at all, in a very good way. It's just just looking at my kids playing together, having fun together, laughing, um, just the little things that they do when they first wake up, how they're all different. One of them would immediately run towards me and ask me for a hug. The other one, she won't ask. She would just, clinch to my neck. One of them would actually be a little upset at me when she wakes up. I don't know why. So just seeing all these beautiful details, it's just something I nothing could have prepared me for that, to what I actually experienced with having four kids. And I would also share that it's not easy. It's actually so much harder than I thought. It's very hard, and it would be unfair to try to portray it as something else. It's very hard, but it's not something that we um, that takes away any of the joy that we experience. Just Father Isaiah has, in one of his songs, says, um, anything that's good is born from a struggle.
Oh yeah,
You
that's
know,
a good song.
and I love that. I love singing that verse. And
It's called The Struggler, right?
yeah, struggling.
Yeah, in case you guys want to listen to it.
Anything good is born from a struggle, or something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's true, and it works. It's with our kids. That's exactly what happens. A struggle, it's a daily struggle, but what we experience with having that many kids, which to some families around us is not that many.
Yeah, like it depends on your perspective.
Like, yeah, exactly.
'Cause
Exactly.
could
This is
be
probably, I guess, aimed at someone who's maybe under having
under
two,
two.
maybe thinking about a third one, maybe they're a little bit scared.
Yeah, they're like,
There is nothing to be scared about. And I truly mean that. There's nothing to be scared about. There's no, I even financially, when I had one and when we had two, it was just, financially, it was just, we had what we needed. And at that time,
in
it,
that season.
in that season, yeah.
Mhm.
And God has transformed our lives to the point where we are today, where we're no millionaires or anything like that, but we just have what we need. And we go back to simplicity. But anyways, um
I think it goes along also with like trust in God, right? So we're not saying like that one, two, there's never really a right number. I think it's like, regardless if you have one or five or eight, like, regardless, like, God's calling is different and unique for every family. So as long as we're like trusting in Him and open to saying little yeses or what he shows us, that we also know that there's families that can't, and then they also make the decision of adopting. So there's so many beautiful ways that God can build a family, and I think the most important thing that he calls us to do is share his love, his generosity, and and there's a special mission for each family. But there's also a beautiful joy in large families that we have been able to experience in that special calling for large families. And I think it's just, it does it, like you said, like when we had one, it felt like a lot too, and we're like, wow, how can we have more, and is it going to be hard? But then once we had two, that was hard because it's like now we're juggling. I had to learn how to juggle two children. But then also, I feel like there's certain graces that the Lord starts giving with each little yes. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not just like, it's a journey, like in anything, like in our faith. We're giving the Lord little yeses, and he takes those yeses and does amazing things. And I think with each child, we've grown and we have learned and we've been transformed because of what you say. Each child is so unique, so special. It's a gift from God, and it just comes with so much value and so much to learn. So for me, it's been more of a surrender and trust, and giving it to God, that even though if I might feel fear at some moment, the Lord's gonna pour his graces. And then now, from where before we weren't surrounded by support of larger families, where we'd be like the weird ones desiring to have a large family, the Lord now has brought us to places where we're surrounded by large families, and we've been able to meet more families that have that beautiful perspective. So that's been a gift from God too.
Mm-hmm. Amen. I think when we first moved here and we were,
Living in a city, and now we're in
yeah,
a slow town.
exactly. Now we're at a much slower town. But I remember one of the first times we went to mass, and in the parking lot, I saw that there was this white van that parked next to us. It was a passenger van, and once the door opened, just it was one kid after the other, and I lost count. And I saw so many beautiful things. One of them was just seeing one of the older kids, which at the time I looked at him and I was like, he's probably 15, 16 years old. And I think I was right, because now it turns out that family is,
Our
lives,
neighbors.
they're our neighbors. Um, but anyways, this older kid was helping, with the little one, with the one that was still in the car seat. And I thought that was so beautiful. And I saw, I just saw they were so pure. And I don't know how I could tell just by seeing them getting out of the car. And I was like, I think I think this is a homeschooling family. And the three things that gave it away for me were the passenger van, the many kids, and just how pure they were. And I thought to myself, this is a homeschooling family. And then later, we met them at one of the church activities, like a community gathering or something like that. And we met them, and then we learned that they were our neighbors. They live about 2 blocks away, and now we're good friends with them. And so God has put families like that, like that would inspire us, not necessarily to have more kids, but just to be open to life,
And
and
not live in fear,
not live in
right?
fear,
Because
not live in fear,
the
because
world tries to shut us down in a way where we're like, oh, your hands are so full, or oh my God, how do you guys do it? Or just so many little comments.
yeah. And just today, I met with a family member that I hadn't seen him in quite a few years. I I think last time I saw him was about 4 or 5 years ago, and we've had about 3 kids since. So so he saw me, and he asked me, so how many kids is it that you have? And I said, well, I have 4 and then 1 on the way. And he had the usual reaction. He's like, oh my God, yeah, how can you have so many kids? It seems so hard. And I said, yeah, I mean, it's hard, but it's not that weird to us. It just isn't. But it's pretty cool. Having a big family is pretty cool. I shared with him. I said, you know, kids are the one thing that could transform your life in ways that you never thought was possible. So I don't know, man. I just love having kids. And he said something that my God, I just couldn't believe he asked me that. But he asked me. He said, "So what about your wife? What does she do?" And I said, she just stays at home with the kids. And he said, so she doesn't work? And I said, no. And he asked me, you rarely have anyone ask you this question, but he said, so I mean, are you okay financially? Just and I said, yeah, we are, thank God. We have everything we need. But I was so surprised that he would ask me that question. And I don't think that he did anything wrong. Now that I think about it and then we talk about it, what God does in your life
Yeah,
will raise
I'm
questions
sorry.
like
Yeah, we
these.
try to be understanding with
Yeah.
others as
No, of
well.
course. Of course. And well, it goes back to the culture thing that you mentioned earlier, but I do want to make emphasis on the fact that what God does in our lives, in your life, it is something that's worth uh, uh, wondering about. How is that possible? Yes, it's possible. It may not be the way that you think. I know I'm not a millionaire,
Hmm.
um, but I am. We have tried to simplify our lives, the best way we can, so that we can have freedom with our kids. We can have freedom with our choices. We are open to life, but I do believe that you have to be responsible. If you are open to life, then make sure every other decision that you're making in your life, especially when it comes to having, wanting, and getting, and buying, and doing, make sure those decisions are also synchronized with your desire to being open to life. So I think that's very important. And like you said, we understand that not everyone thinks the way we do, and especially uh, family members and people from our culture that sadly we have been this generation has been taught to be afraid of having kids. And he told me that, this family member, he said, I have 2 and neither of them wants to have kids.
Yeah, I've been
He
hearing
told me
that
that.
from a lot of grandparents that are like friends of my mom's and stuff. They'll share like, still waiting for my children to have,
And they
kids
don't want
because
to.
I want to be a grandma, but
And they don't want to. Now there is hope, because at some point of my life I didn't want to have kids. I was very young.
hmm
And I don't want to say I was young and like what my kids would say,
But
the
I
S
think
word.
that's where our
But I
core
was
value of
young.
faith comes in.
Exactly. So we were transformed.
Hmm.
That's why we mentioned on the previous episode, we said we have a life before Jesus and a life after Jesus.
Hmm.
And after Jesus came into our lives, we're no longer afraid of the things we used to be. And right now, if anything, it's not that we're thinking about having 8 kids like our neighbors, or any more, or any less.
Yeah,
What
I
we're
don't think
thinking
we've ever
about,
put like a number.
no, we're
It's just been the Lord.
yeah, and we're just, what we try to do is with each kid, learn as much as we can from that little human, because
Hmm.
each one of our kids, like you said, they're unique, and they teach us so many things from their uniqueness. They teach us so many things. They each have their way of being, and the things that I learned from them. And I will just share one, um, and then you can jump in. My kids, they don't remember when you do something wrong. They just see the positive. Um, if I raise my voice at one of my girls. I did that the other day, and I felt really bad afterwards. And I approached her and I said, "Hey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I raised my voice at you." And before I said why I was sorry, I said, "Hey, I just want to say sorry." And she said, "Why?" And I'm like, "Hey, I raised my voice at you and I'm sorry." And she's like, "Don't you remember I raised my voice?" And she just didn't remember, you know? And I love that. I love that because especially with the people that I love the most, I don't want to remember the bad things that they do because I know that they love me. And at the time, they were probably going through a hard time when they said something that hurt my feelings or they just did something they shouldn't have. I love, I would love to be like that. Just not remember or
Or not hold on to
not hold
that.
on to it. So
Yeah, and I think like right now we're expecting our baby number 5 in a few weeks, days, we don't know. And it's really beautiful because once again, I have to be vulnerable and be honest and say that at the beginning, once you do start having more children, like it's not as easy to share with those that will automatically have like a different reaction than what your like friends that are open to life and large families are gonna say. And it shouldn't be that way because we're confident um in the excitement and our happiness and our joy together as having a large family. But there is that sense of like, oh, how are they gonna react when I tell them, or this family member or this friend? And maybe you just don't want to share it with them as fast, as with others. And I have to share that with this pregnancy, there was this at the beginning, I was a little sentimental about it, and I was like, wow, people get so excited when material things come, like material things, a new car, or I can have 5 cars or 6 or 7, right? Or I can have a boat and I can have this. I don't know, just things that the world offers. And then there's this sense of like making others feel like there's fear, or like you're doing something wrong because you want to have another child. And I think that's kind of like being vulnerable and saying like, yeah, you could feel that for a little bit, but then like as long as you're like a team and a family, and like you said, simplifying your life, making decisions that were like, okay, we're gonna make this decision, but maybe we're gonna cut down on this. Maybe we don't, because we decided to homeschool, we're able to have flexibility, and I'm home with the kids, I'm present, so there's no need for daycares. And there's just little changes that add so much value. And then our faith is a big one. God's providence obviously has been in part of our journey of making our family larger. And trusting. And I finally gave it to God, and I was like, you know what, God, each child has been such a blessing, has transformed our lives. They're so unique, they're so special. And our family has only grown in love. And I feel his presence in our family. I feel how he's been working in our marriage through them. And I pray to you, like, I surrender. You back me up. I don't want to like keep trying to defend myself or feel like I have to. Just we trust in you. And I feel like ever since I like kind of surrendered that, it's helped so much to like keep growing our family.
You mentioned homeschooling our kids, and we promised we talk more
Yeah,
about
that
that.
was the next topic.
I know there is so many people that think about it, but then immediately they shut themselves down. They're like, "Yeah, that's impossible for me." It seemed impossible for me when you first mentioned it, I think one of your responses when I would ask you, hey, do you want to have a large family? Or hey, you want to go for number three? One of the things you would come back with would be, well, at that point, you better, think about homeschooling, because I was never on board with that. And I'll be the one who says that I was never on board with homeschooling. And I was very wrong. I didn't know enough about it. I didn't know anything about it. And that's why I didn't want to do it. So I guess it's a very smart thing. If you don't know about anything, then yeah, you shouldn't do it. You should learn about it first. But I would always say no to it. And then once we had our fourth kid, or excuse me, our third, you started just talking about it more and more. And I just felt it coming. I said, you know what, this is one of those things that when Ivana talks about it so much, this is just gonna end up happening. So let me learn about it or open myself to the possibility, because I think this is gonna happen. And the more I would hear about it, the more I would hear you talk about it, the more I would like it and enjoy it. And again, I've always desired a simple and different life. I don't know why. I don't consider myself a rebel, but I've always wanted to have a different life. I don't want to go for the ordinary, just get married, have kids, make them go to school, and die. Um, not that I'm being a rebel, but I just think that there's so much more to life than just thinking about those things, which, yeah, they're important. But in our homeschooling journey, the kind of things that I have experienced, I wouldn't trade them for anything. So this, I feel the sensation of being at home with who I am, with who I was created to be as a homeschool father. And I think that's beautiful. I wouldn't change that for anything. And I have to thank you and thank God for putting that in your heart. But at the time where you first started proposing it, I thought it was impossible for us to do it. And I was wrong. I was wrong. It's not impossible. I think when you want to do something that is synchronized with what the Lord wants you to do, He will make it happen. He will make it happen. I'm not saying homeschooling is for everyone, but if it's in your heart, I've learned that God talks to us through our dreams. That is one way that God communicates with us in a very specific way. He talks to us through our dreams. If you have the dream of homeschooling your children, He will support that, and He will honor every step you make towards that. If in this case we're talking about homeschooling, if that is your dream, He will support and honor every step you make, and you will start feeling that. And that's what you did. You started praying with this rosary.
Yeah, there's a whole
There's a whole story.
to like
We'll
our
do
decision.
one episode. We'll do another episode about this rosary. But you started praying about it, and then you started noticing signs, very clear and specific signs. And I don't know if you want to elaborate just a little bit more before we close.
Yeah, well, with the homeschooling, it's like a whole world. It's a whole other. It's like you can go so deep. There's so many areas to talk about. We definitely probably have to do like a specific episode just on homeschooling, but just to like kind of get into it, in when we definitely had a lot of prayer before we made the decision. I think it was like between 6 months to a year that we were praying about it, that we were asking for signs, that the Lord was stirring our hearts, that He would send certain people and little things, because I feel like that's how the Lord works, right? And then we needed clarity to make the decision. And I think He ended up giving us a lot of clarity in making the decision, but that doesn't mean that it was easy, because the homeschool is like a whole journey. And I think similar to having a large family. We're not saying that if you have a small one, it's wrong, or a large, it's the right thing. We're not saying if you have your kids in school, it's wrong, or if wherever you think you know your child will be best, and you'll love them the most and be present. I think that's important, because you don't want to be a homeschool parent and not be loving and being present, because that could also not be good, right? So every homeschool also looks different depending on the family culture and how the home is, right? But for us, there was a large desire to be more present with our children, to have more time, more freedom, more flexibility, be able to form their souls more, have more meals together, breakfast, have slow time, no simplicity of life, no rushing, being able to read more books and choose their passions, their stories. And there's so many styles of homeschooling, that's a whole other topic. But we prayed about it and the Lord gave us clarity, and we took the leap of faith, and that's been a few years now. And at the beginning, it was the same thing. We were not surrounded by large groups. We were the only homeschool family in our community at the time. And we're like, okay, Lord, now we took the step. You sent us the signs, but now you know what we're gonna start needing. Now we needed to find a good community. We needed to be inspired by other families in faith that were also homeschooling and that we could learn from, and friends for the kids that were also homeschooling, because they did have friends, but it was nice. It's nice for them to have other homeschool friends that they're living, they're in that journey. And little by little, the Lord started doing that. Now He started giving us little groups, and now we're living in a slower town, and somehow He's giving us a wonderful, beautiful group as well. And it's just been a journey. But like you said, I think we've grown from it. I've especially continued to grow, because this is something you have to discern, like in everything. You consistently praying about it, discerning with the Lord what is the best thing for each child, because each child's unique. And we could get into different subjects. Also, check out A Mother's Little Way in my YouTube channel, where you will find faith, family, and homeschooling. I interview a few moms there also that are homeschool mothers, veterans, already like graduating their kids and stuff like that. And it's more of a visual channel where you could see a little bit of our slow living lifestyle. So definitely check it out if you're interested. But that's kind of like a little short piece of what homeschooling has given us. But definitely there's little things that I can see that the Lord has planted in our children with homeschooling. Like to be able to, in our faith, we pray the rosary, and every other day we're able to do that, have breakfast and pray the rosary with the children. I've noticed, like, if we're rushing to school in the mornings, we can't do that. And then having breakfast together, learning to do our beds in the morning, and then starting our curriculum. And it's just such a gift. And they also get to see like mommy having a baby, and that's beautiful. And then also going to struggles through that, but they're learning about life. We're baking things, or we're going to activities in the afternoon. So it's honestly been a beautiful journey, and I'm still learning, but thank God I am surrounded by now mothers that have also a lot of wisdom and experience. And there's still also the same thing, there will be criticism sometimes.
There will always be criticism. And if I don't know who said this, but It's like, if you don't want to be criticized, then don't do anything, So,
And I've done the same thing. I've surrendered to the Lord, and once again I tell him, Lord, you called us to this. I trust in you. You defend me. I don't
yeah.
want to be always defending myself and what I'm doing with my children. I know that we're doing something beautiful and I can see the fruits, and maybe we don't see all the fruits right now, but I trust that the Lord will. And I've seen it in other large homeschool families or smaller ones, even mothers that have decided to homeschool that have one child. Like I've met some that you can see there's a certain something special about it.
Yeah. And I think, just to end this episode, before it gets too long, I would say this: you can't love in a rush. You can't listen to someone in a rush. You can't teach in a rush. So, thank you very much for being here. And one of our babies woke up. So, perfect timing. We'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
See you next time.